am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joint parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, the science of stuck and trauma healing. We all experience stuckness in our lives. We feel stuck in our relationships, career paths, body struggles, addiction issues, and more. Many of us know what we need to do to move forward, but find ourselves unable to take the leap to make it happen. In this episode, we explore what it means to feel stuck, the hidden benefits of staying stuck, and how to move forward. I'm speaking with Britt. She is a clinician, educator, and trauma specialist. She's trained in IFS and somatic experiencing. She's also the author of the new book, The Science of Stuck: Breaking Through Inertia to Find Your Path Forward. She received her BA from Duke University and her master's from the University of Kansas, where she later became an award-winning adjunct instructor. Britt speaks and writes about emotional wellness and healing. Britt herself has been through a lot. She has battled with depression, addiction, eating disorders, love addiction. She was in a cult at some point in her life and eventually found the path towards healing. In this episode, we talk about trauma and healing, what children need most from their parents, the consequences of growing up with emotionally unskilled parents and poor boundaries, healing modalities and how to recover from toxic habits, shadow intelligence, and more. I hope you'll find this conversation helpful. Britt is an energetic and dynamic individual, and I really loved our time together. Her main message is, there is nothing wrong with you. You're not lazy, crazy, or broken. Please enjoy. Britt, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
I know. I'm excited to talk about the science of stuck. I think stuckness is something, we're all familiar with, right?
Yes.
We all know what that means, what that feels like. But again, I would love for you just to define so that everybody is on the same page, all the listeners. What do you mean by being stuck?
So I called it the science of stuck because if I called it like, you are traumatized, here's how to heal, then people would be like, I don't have trauma. And that's a whole thing. That word is so loaded, but we all know what it's like to be stuck. So the way I define stuck as assuming that you have a safe enough environment and access to the things that you need, the basics. Stuck means there's no logical reason why you're not doing a thing. And yet, nevertheless, whether it's career or relationships or finances or body stuff, fitness stuff, whatever, that you're not doing the things that you want to do or taking the steps that you want to take. You can be stuck with anxiety being a thing that is with you as a constant companion all day long. Trauma is one way we get stuck, but stuckness is sort of a thing for everybody. And there's a reason that we get stuck scrolling on our phones. There's a reason we get stuck procrastinating. And it's not because we're lazy and it's not because we're crazy. And there's science behind it. So that's sort of where I come from with my work.
And stuckness can be very short term and very long term. You could be stuck on an issue for a while in your marriage, for example, right? Or you could be stuck because of trauma, like you're saying, for many years.
Yes. And it's so important to me too, to disclaim, like if you're in a relationship where there's overt or covert abuse happening, I wouldn't call that stuck. I would call that abuse. Stuck assumes, again, that you have relative access, a safe enough environment where your basic needs are met. And yet nevertheless, something is missing, or you're doing something you don't want to do, or you're not doing things that you do want to do. You can be stuck with parenting. You can feel very stuck with the whole family, children thing. And again, knowing a little bit about how things get stuck and why, give us choice, and then we can get moving.
Yeah, but I think the thing is, when you are stuck, unfortunately, you don't see the choices. I obviously, as a person who has been stuck, right? It's always hard. Sometimes you need a third party, a therapist or something like that, a coach, to help you generate insight for you to see that you're stuck. Why do we get stuck? Let's explore the why a little bit.
Sure. Well, again, one reason, some people genuinely have no choices in their situation, whatever that situation is. And again, those are not the people that I'm talking about. I'm saying, why do we get stuck? Because one, we don't have accurate information about the brain. When was the last time someone asked themselves, I say this to all my clients, when was the last time you asked yourself, how does this make me feel in my body? Does my nervous system like the person I'm in front of? How do I feel in my body about this job or this scenario or this friendship or whatever? And so if we're not given accurate information about how our brains and our bodies work, then we are going to get stuck and we're going to think the problem is us. And so myths about mental health are a very large contributor to our state of stuckness. And then the other one is less popular. It's sometimes for some people, in some cases, we get stuck because it's scary to change, and being comfortable, even in the uncomfortable, the familiar, can feel really appealing. And so sometimes we get stuck because we're not willing to do the scary stuff. And no shame, I wasn't willing to do the scary stuff for decades. And we're ready when we're ready, and if we have the privilege to have access to choices. But we get stuck because of lack of information on one hand and lack of willingness on the other.
You also enlist benefits to being stuck. I want you to speak quickly about that too.
Sure. And when I say there's benefits to being stuck, I am not victim blaming. I'm not saying it's your fault or you should just feel ashamed of yourself. No, I don't deal in shame. We all do that to ourselves often enough. But there are benefits to not doing things, like comfort. That's a biggie. Sometimes doing things is uncomfortable and it's scary. So comfort is a benefit to staying stuck. Image preservation. If I don't, take a risk with this new thing I want to do, I don't have to worry about failing. And then everyone is going to judge me. What's another one? Financial preservation. So if I don't start a business, I don't have to risk financial resources. And so again, without shaming ourselves, it's so important to know that there are benefits to even the most unhealthy behaviors. And if we don't identify the benefits, then we're going to stay stuck. So without shame, we need to get really honest and kind of like accountants do a cost benefit analysis, not just what is this costing me? We all know that, my health and my well-being and my joy and my connectivity, but what is it also benefiting you? And when the costs are greater than the benefits, then we change.
I think that's the hardest part for people to take that honest look. Right? What are the costs and what are the benefits? And the benefits are not like you're saying, positive things. They're serving you rather, right? That's what we're talking about here. You had quite an interesting life. So I would love to talk a little bit about you, because my listeners love stories and we all love stories. And we want to hear, how you got where you are now, because it gives hope to people. It gives ideas that, right, there's possibility. And I love sharing people's healing stories, and especially if the before and after are very drastically different. So you struggled with addiction. You were part of a cult. I mean, we can do whole episodes on any of the topics, but I would love to know. And you went to like an amazing school, Duke University. It's not like you come. What was your childhood like? You don't talk about that. You don't write about that. Are you comfortable speaking a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. And I'll write about it and talk about it to the degree that it lends credibility to what I'm saying. But it was so important to me not to write a memoir. Like that was so not what my aim was. So my childhood looked fine on the surface. It looked normal. My parents were married and we had a house and we never had had to worry about food or electricity. So I grew up thinking, what is my problem? But I didn't understand that even the most normal looking families can be completely full of toxicity and boundaryless behavior and overt abuse, covert abuse, but abuse doesn't always look like abuse while it's happening. And that took me many, many years to figure out. And so as a child, I had some very interesting symptoms. I was hypersensitive and I was bullied a lot and I was alone a lot and I self-soothed using really destructive things because they were available. And then as a teenager, when I had more choices for how to self-soothe and numb, I did those things. And then I did go to Duke, and you would think, well, at Duke, there's just healthy, intelligent people. Like you would think so, but like anywhere, humans are complex. And just because someone can function in one area, academics was easy for me. That was like, do this, read this. My books didn't hurt me or gaslight me. So I found a lot of comfort and escape in studies and academics. And that game was easy for me to play. But then I found drugs and relationship issues and eating disorders and depression. And I guess depression and eating disorders more found me. And wild relationships. I joined a fundamentalist cult as a way of trying to calm the chaos of my mind. And that didn't work. So I switched to equal and opposite destruction and dysfunction. And then eventually I got myself together. I was very fortunate that I had access to good therapists who told me, guess what? You have a brain. Guess what? That brain lives in a body. Here's how some of the stuff works. And that way, I didn't even know what my choices were. I didn't even know I was dysfunctional. I knew I was dysfunctional, but I didn't understand what dysfunction really meant until a therapist sat down and said, listen, this was your normal, but normal doesn't equal healthy.
And so all of those years, you thought you were crazy or there was something wrong with you?
Mm-hmm. Totally. And that's what I hear as a therapist in private practice. Yeah. People come in and they describe their problem and they say, fix me, I'm crazy. Help me, I'm broken. It's like, well, you don't need fixing because you're not broken. You're also not crazy. And there's a reason that this is happening and we can untangle that and work with it. But there is no such thing as a crazy person. It's not a thing. It does not exist. Crazy is not a thing.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is you're describing very well the trauma response, right? Trauma ultimately is disconnection from self. Mm-hmm. And when you are so deeply disconnected from your core authentic self, you're just in this chaotic world, just going here, there, doing different things, throwing yourself, trying different things, risking things, sabotaging things, right? All of those behaviors. And then, but that's the fundamental thing that, at least we're trying to achieve here through the podcast, to help parents not to do such parenting that destroys their children connection from themselves, right? But for that, you need to have somewhat of a healthy parent, right? That who is in tune and connected to themselves. Here comes the conversation about boundaries. I know where I end and begin, and I know where my child ends and begins. And there is no enmeshment or gaslighting and all of that. Recognizing that. But again, the parental trauma plays a huge role here, right? It's not like the parent is a jerk or no parent gets up in the morning and says, you know what, I'm going to screw up my kids and it's going to be for the rest of their life. So it's just like this trauma continues through generations. And this is what we talk about here. But so what I would love to know, and it seems like you escalated your risk-taking, your destructive behaviors over time escalate, right? Maybe it starts with an eating disorder, then you go into meth addiction or...
I laugh because that's
what
you
speak
did
about that? It's like, wow, the pain is so big. It's not that the person is so crazy that they're doing those things. The pain is so impossible to bear, probably.
And it's tricky. Well, going back to the parenting thing, my career when I first started was as a play therapist. So I don't have children, but I wanted to work with children because I needed to understand, how do kids interpret what's happening to them. Because parents would say to me, like, why should we take our kids to you? You don't have them. I'm like, I'm not a parenting coach. I'm not here to tell you how to parent. I'm here to tell you how to decode what your child is actually saying and play as the language of children. And so it's so important to know that as a parent, you don't have to protect your kids from everything. As long as you're doing enough work on yourself, like the best thing a parent can do for a child's mental health is work on themselves. So, okay. So
I know. Yeah, no, that's no, it doesn't, we need to pause on that one. I think that's the biggest predictor of children's well-being is the parental mental health, the parental well-being. I think the rest will be fine. Parenting would be easy. I think the hardest part about parenting is not parenting. You can learn parenting tips and techniques, but if you are not a whole, connected to yourself individual, right, emotionally somewhat healthy, then it's going to be problematic. No matter how many great techniques, parenting tools I give you, it's not just going to work.
And it's also not because you're a bad parent. I have clients and they feel awful. I'm screaming at my children and I'm totally losing it. And I gave them the iPad and I let them have 10 hours of screen time. What's wrong with me? It's like, well, you may have been fine, but children are incredibly triggering. And so it might have been that you're totally cool. And now that you have this child who's this age, you're triggered. But again, it's not because you're a terrible person. It's because your nervous system is doing things. And we can work that out. If you're just a terrible person, there's nothing we can do really about that. But if you're a person who wants to do better, who's making choices that aren't great, we can work with that because you have a brain and your brain is plastic and it changes and it can learn things and grow. So such good news. I really like to destigmatize and de-shame parents. It's like, yeah, you have a nervous system and kids are triggering. So yeah, it makes sense that you feel the way you feel. And then going back to your other question, yeah, I did more and more and more of the thing. It's really hard to maintain a steady state with any addictive behavior, whether it's scrolling or binge watching TV or smoking meth or whatever, because you need more and more of the thing to maintain the numbness. So you can only numb for so long before you're going to need more because your story really wants to be told. And our stories are told either through symptoms, like physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, getting triggered, but our stories will find a way to be told if we're not listening to them. And that's an incredibly compelling reason to listen, because otherwise the addictions become really, really wild after some time. So it's a lot easier. I mean, easy to say now, but going back, I would have told my 21-year-old self, okay, listen, it's going to probably be easier for you to deal with your pain now than to wait. But she didn't have, that age, that 21-year-old didn't have the resources that I have now. And she didn't have the information that I have now. So again, why didn't I do this 10 years earlier? Well, because you didn't know these things 10 years earlier. You didn't have access 10 years earlier. So no shame. Let's just figure it out as we can with what we have and move forward.
Mm-hmm. And like, what did you do? What was the first thing that you did? And in what kind of state were you when you started the healing journey? Let's call it the healing journey.
So mine was not linear, and it was not like, I'm going to do this step and now I'm going to It was more like my life is burning to the ground and I'm just going to try a lot of things all at the same time and see what sticks. And then just, I had a sponsor in the 12-step program tell me, follow the green lights. So if you're doing a lot of things, where are the things, because we're so good at this doesn't work. And I tried all this and I'm doing the work and it's not working. And our brains sort of go where we train them to go. Like if we're telling our brain, look for everything that we're doing wrong, it's going to find everything we're doing wrong. And this is not about positive thinking. This isn't like just think positive, but it's helpful to train your brain to go, okay, what's actually working? Like of all the things I have going on, is there anything that's working a little bit, even just a teeny tiny teaspoon of a bit? Follow that. And so this was me just trying to follow breadcrumbs out of the forest. That's what it looked like for me.
So what made you seek out help in the 12-step program, like in the beginning? But did your parents prompt or
Yeah, my family are not therapy going, wellness, mental healthy people.
And while we're at this, while this was happening in your life, did your parents know the depth and the extent of how messy things were for you?
So I left.
Or were you hiding?
I left New York at 18 and I never came back. And so my parents, I didn't really give them a whole lot of insight. After a while, I was like, I need to go to treatment. Will you help me pay for it? And they did, which was great. But they haven't really been part of my journey or my healing trajectory. And they're not bad people. They're awesome people. It's just this isn't their thing. And so I found other paths forward. But yeah, so the 12 steps was mostly because that's all I knew. If you're an addict, you go to 12-step meetings, and that's available and it's free and it's everywhere and it's all the time. And so that's where I started. I don't think that is the be all end all to sobriety, but it's a wonderful resource and it worked really nicely for a while.
I see. And from there, you then learned new things and you discovered somatic experiencing, body-based therapy. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that wasn't through the 12 steps, but that was sort of concurrently. I was doing 12 steps and I was doing trauma work and I was doing body work and experimenting and reading things. And just, I was just a spinny tornado, Tasmanian devil kind of situation. And fortunately, I found my way to some really good authors. So Peter Levine, who created somatic experiencing, Richard Schwartz, who created internal family systems. These things were all incredibly helpful for me. And so I was able to build on my teeny tiny toolbox and then eventually have enough things that I was able to sort of feel like I owned my body instead of my body running amok.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about. I think people always want to, we always hear, oh, I started my healing journey. I did this, I did that. But I mean, it seems like you've done a lot, and I would love to explore the benefits of those modalities and how they helped you. Obviously, it looks different for everyone, right? But I would like to discuss a little bit what healing means. And it's not like we're doing this and we're done with it. And it's like this 3-step process, but it feels a lot better. After some time, your life becomes much more enjoyable and things are better. Those of us who did some healing work, right? So what did you find the most useful in your healing journey? So tell us that first.
Well, I think, like you said, it's never just, here's the one thing, do it and check, you're good to go. Mm-hmm. So we have minds that think thoughts. So we need thought work. We have bodies that respond to the environment. So we need body work, right? So we need to do top-down work, which is logic and thinking. And how do we talk to ourselves and cognitive analytical things like boundaries and whatever. And then bottom up is you have a body and you have a nervous system, and you need both, because I really liked the cognitive work because I could just think and I could just stay in my head, which is a very safe place for me. But cognitive work without body work is going to lead to a lot of insight, but no change. Body work without cognitive work is going to lead to, I can feel my body being centered, but I'm turned off from the things that I know and what I want and who I am and all the cognitive stuff. So we really need both. And somatic work, somatic experiencing work is wonderful. Internal family systems. There's a bajillion mechanisms to doing top down and bottom up work. For me, internal family systems and somatic experiencing were the two most potent that I found. And I didn't have access to therapists who did this for a little bit. So fortunately, a lot of the work you can, with the world we live in now I've seen better information about trauma on social media than I've seen in some of the therapists that I've seen, because therapists are not required to be trauma trained, which would be helpful if I had known that. Everyone needs to know that your therapist isn't necessarily trauma trained, which is fine, but it's helpful to know that. So that was what it was for me, was IFS, internal family systems, and somatic work.
That's great. When was the first time you went to therapy in your life?
I went to therapy for the first time, probably 23. I was 23, and it was a very, very heavily religious, spiritualistic kind of quote therapy, where it was, I don't have a problem. I have like a demon and I just need to make it go away by praying it out of me. And if I do that, I'm fine. That was very appealing, because then I didn't have to feel my feelings. It's like, oh, I don't have pain. I don't have sadness. I don't have trauma. I have a foreign invader that I can get out of me. And no disrespect to like the spiritual people, because I'm a spiritual person, and I'm not saying that the world of demons is not like, who the hell I don't know. I just know for me at the time, it was not a demon. It was sadness and guilt and shame and pain and fear, not a foreign invader. So I was able to sort of spiritually bypass a lot of it for a little bit.
I think also for a person who already has trauma, the first thing we lose is the choicefulness, our sense of agency, right? And when you seek that kind of therapy, I'm thinking if you're again giving your power to some kind of external force, be that the demon or whatever you want to call it, then you're being stuck using your language in your painful, tragic situation. Right?
Yes. And it's, that's the cost, right? If I outsource my power to someone in charge, a charismatic, narcissistic leader of some whatever that's promising me freedom from pain and suffering if I follow them and give them my money and all of that. If I outsource my power, that's going to temporarily work. That's a type of addiction, just like anything else. Then eventually it's going to cost too much. And that's when the change process happens.
Why do you think it works temporarily? Because does it put us into this inner child position? And we always, because the problem is rooted in the childhood, right? The adult who was supposed to care and protect us and set the boundaries and listen to our feelings wasn't able to do that. So we're always looking for that constantly, misplaced. So we place it onto other things, later realizing we have to find that inside of us, within us. It's no longer there anymore. We're not a kid anymore. The responsibility lies on us. I think that's a hard one for a lot of us.
So hard. And I say, and this was true for me too, we look for our parents in the things that we buy, in the food that we eat, and in the relationships we pursue. And if you had a good childhood, this isn't just for people with traumatic childhood. If you had a good childhood, then you have to grieve that your time of having a good mom to take care of all your needs is now over and it's now your turn to go.
True. Yeah.
If you had a bad childhood, then you have to grieve that you didn't get it and you're not going to get to be a little kid chronologically again. And so even if you had an amazing childhood, good or bad, we have to grieve that developmental stage is now complete, for good or for bad, for better or for worse. And now it's our job to assume the role of inner parent. But it's very tempting to give that role of parent to someone else. And the cult life for me works just like any addiction temporarily works, because for a small amount of time, I felt taken care of and I felt like I could escape from my pain and I felt that numbing. And again, eventually it stops working. And in some cases, it's incredibly toxic and illegal. And some people die from what they do to avoid the pain. And I get that, but it does work initially, or we wouldn't get ensnared by it. We would never get stuck if the things didn't work to a degree for a time.
Yeah, the cult thing is pretty fascinating. Especially you come from a Jewish background. You went to a Christian fundamentalist cult. Girl, what's going on here, girl?
Rebellion. So as a Long Island Jewish girl growing up in the 80s and 90s, how do you rebel? I had a pretty fairly liberal family. It's I can't come home with purple hair or whatever. I can't listen to death metal because they're okay, that's stupid, but that's fine. I don't think this is stupid. This is what they would have said. So what's the best way for a Jewish girl to distance and rebel against a family of origin? For a Long Island Jewish family, the worst thing you can do is not have purple hair or listen to death metal. It's to become a Christian. And I didn't just become a Christian. I became a fundamentalist living in the Midwest, quitting my job and not associating with anyone who wasn't part of my cult kind of situation. And it was one way to get out of my family dynamic that I grew up in. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it was effective.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes people go far, right, to connect to themselves. I mean, it's a journey for everyone. I find that fascinating. Every human being's life is just incredible. How far you travel to meet yourself.
That's so beautiful. And it's so true. We do incredible acts of contortion to avoid ourselves. And what we're seeking this whole time, this is like the Wizard of Oz thing. We're seeking home from the second we grow up and become our own adulty kind of person. But home isn't an external location. It's an internal state of being. And it's really hard to find. And it's well worth the effort. That's why I tell people, I'm the journey home is going to be really awful and it will be incredibly worth it.
if we as parents, I'm a parent, and this was the biggest thing I didn't want to screw up in my child, to help her be who she is so that she doesn't have to try all those contortionist things and go far to meet herself, obviously to the best of my ability. And I think if we can just provide that for our children, life and people will, first of all, there will be world peace. I am 100% strongly believe in that world will be in a more peaceful place if we could just see our children for who they are, meet their emotional needs, make them feel seen, heard, understood, visible, and not destroy that connection that they have with themselves. Allow their emotions and all of that. They don't have to do all this crazy work, quote unquote, when they grow older.
It's pretty remarkable. Yeah.
Right. And we can do that through parenting. Wow. Right. We can change the world through parenting.
I agree with that 1000%. And it's one of the things I saw as a play therapist, but parents are not taught that children are independent beings who have their own things. It's like most people are taught your children are little mini versions of you. They're extensions of you. They're reflections of you. And damn it, they will obey and comply and do what they're told and be good. Because if they're not good, you're not good. I get that was the parenting message a lot of people got. And because of that, a lot of messes came about. But what a gift to be able, and I told parents this all the time. I closed my kids' practice when COVID hit, but I'm like, if the best thing you can do for your kid is just see who they are. Because I see adults every single day who the biggest wish of their heart, the deepest longing is I wish someone would see me and know that I'm enough. And that's a job that a parent can do, assuming they have accurate information and willingness and access to resources. But parenting is powerful. It's an incredibly potent medication for a lot of the ails we find as adults.
Would you like to become a parent one day?
No, I have chosen the child-free by choice routes. I'm very comfortable with that. People are like, well, why? Why are you
I'm not asking that for just poking and saying why, but it's a choice you're making and it's a wise choice. We have to respect your choice. But the reason I'm asking is it's just, you talk about healing. This is a portal to yet a whole another level of healing. It's incredible. No, not everybody has to become a parent, in my honest opinion. And I work with all sorts of dysfunctional parents. I think people need to know that it is a choice. You can or you cannot be a parent because it's a hard, responsible job. For the things we are talking about. Yes. It's not about buying them sneakers, taking them to vacations, or giving them food, or loving them even. You can love your kids, but you can mess up big time. So love and raising emotionally healthy children are not the same. And it's a tricky thing. Somebody asked also, that does it mean I have to do my own healing work, then become a parent? Not necessarily, because you can heal while you're parenting, because it's an opportunity. Again, there's no prescription here, but I have chosen to have only one child because I know that this is enough. I don't have capacity in my nervous system to care for more than one child. And I think it's just knowing what you want is important.
Well, and working backwards, the secret shame I hear from many parents, because I see people all day, every day, and the parents by and large say the same thing, which is, I didn't really feel like I had a choice about becoming a parent. I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. And now that I have these kids, I feel resentful. And that doesn't mean that you don't love them. And that doesn't mean that you're a bad parent. We have to make it safe for parents to grieve if they didn't have the choice. If that was sort of just an expectation that they followed because it's what you do, and now you have a bunch of kids and now you're really upset, then let's create a safe space for you to work through the grief. And you get to grieve that. Again, it doesn't mean you hate your kids or that you regret having them. It's hard. And especially if you don't have choice and you don't have resources and you're not supported. So let's make it safe for parenting to be hard and messy and tough and give you some grace with it.
Did you have siblings?
I have a younger brother.
No, not a whole lot of siblings. What do you wish your parents had given you in terms of emotional development, boundaries, things of this nature? Now that you know a whole lot, what do you think would have made a difference?
I have a long list, so I'll give you.
Give us like top 3 or top 5.
My wish list. And again, I've come to a very peaceful place where my healing work is not about blaming them. It's not even about them. It's about my relationship with myself and the life that I have chosen to build for myself. But if we're going to the what do I wish they would have given me? I wish they would have given me some truth. The truth about who they are, the truth about what our family story is, the truth about where we actually came from and all the stuff there that got buried. Family secrets create a lot of sickness and dysfunction. Mm-hmm. And where there is truth and willingness to tolerate truth and willingness to work through truth, a lot of the more extreme stuff tends to settle. So I wish that I could have had a big heaping dose of honesty from the jump.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, because then shame gets steeped in. When the stories are not told or not told in a truthful way, the shame just festers around all of that.
Yes.
Right? Yes.
And we carry trauma. So if you're trying to protect the family, like by saying everyone was happy, everyone was healthy, everyone was perfect. But I have a grandmother who I found out later was given electroshock therapy and had bipolar and whatever else, then I'm going to carry those symptoms and not know it because the family story is that we're all fine. And that I get that parents want to protect their children and you need to be age appropriate in how you explain things, but like children need truth in order to grow up and become functional adults.
Wow. That's big. That's huge. Give me a couple more.
Boundaries would have been really helpful. Boundaries would have been a wonderful gift. So having a sense of a boundary is where I stop and you begin. And there are physical boundaries and sexual boundaries and emotional boundaries and conversational boundaries. Like, here's how a boundary works. I didn't know what boundaries were till I was in my late 20s. Like, I don't understand. What does that mean? And like, I don't have boundaries. Like, we don't do boundaries in my family. Boundaries is a bad word. So like truth and boundaries and all the things that come with that, like safety. And they did a lot of things right. They provided for my intellectual and my hobbies. And I had a safe, as far as like overt danger, I had a home where no one was breaking in. So that was good. So they did plenty well, but honesty and boundaries and emotional literacy would have been nice.
Yeah. Let's talk about emotional literacy. I love that because you also have a chapter in the book. What is this called? The emotionally mature family? What was the chapter? Adult, becoming an emotional adult. And there was, the emotionally unskilled family. I love that.
Unskilled is a softer landing than
I know.
Toxic dynamics.
So let's help the listener to be better at this. What tools, things you can teach, on the short time or insights you can share for being emotionally skilled.
Emotionally skillful families. Like every family is dysfunctional because all parents and all people are human and no humans are perfect. Therefore, dysfunction is a continuum. It's not a us and them category. It's not like I had a good family and you had a bad family. It's like we're all messed up to a degree on a continuum. It's just a matter of scale at that point. So the most important thing to become an emotionally skillful family is to be willing to be wrong. Like how hard we attach to our justification and our rightness. It's like, are you willing to, and I put in my book a big disclaimer, this book represents the best information that is available now. And everything in here could be completely debunked in 5 years. And like, okay, if I'm wrong, I'm so going to be bummed out by that. But okay, like if we're willing to be wrong, that covers a lot of ground very quickly. And it's like, we only know what we know. So if you're asking yourself, oh my God, well, am I wrong? What am I wrong about? Then it's time to just kind of get some information, like I put in the book, here are a few family dynamics that are not healthy. And if you're doing this, no shame, recognize that this isn't healthy. And if you're willing to dismantle the norm, again, normal is not a synonym for healthy. If you're willing to dismantle the normal in service of the healthy and functional, you're going to be in really good shape. That willingness is really the linchpin thing that helps tip the scale, I've found.
Yeah, I think that desire to be always right and this is going to be this way, it's again, your term, stuckness, right? Mm-hmm. It comes from stuckness, not being able to be flexible, like that rigidity is stuckness. Yeah. What else?
Well, the boundary one is a biggie. And I see this a lot. Like children are not mini adults. Children are like independent humans and they see things differently and they process things differently. And what might not be a big deal to a grown person is a huge deal to a child. And so getting curious, again, I don't have children, so I had time to just sit and study them all day. It's like, how does this work? Like, oh, that's really interesting. Like in the absence of information, a child will make up a story where they are the villain of the story. So if someone died, I was protected, quote, from death. I wasn't allowed to go to funerals. We didn't talk about death. Death was never something we were allowed to discuss. But like in the absence of that information, I created a whole narrative about how I can cause people to die. And if I think bad thoughts, they can get sick. And that's not a me thing. That's universal. A lot of children, if they're not given good information, age appropriate, of course, they're going to make up a scenario that's 10 times worse than the truth is going to be. So it's okay to tell children about death. In fact, it's good to do that. Things like having children name their body parts from as early as they have language. So not making cute little pet names. It's like, how can children know to protect their bodies? They shouldn't have to, but how can they even begin to describe what's happening to them if they don't have proper anatomical language for themselves? So then these are not things that are huge. They're not expensive. They're not going to require equipment. It's just like, how is the language that we're using to address the kids accurate and honest?
Yeah. That part about your parents sheltering you from not taking you to funerals and not exposing you, so to speak, to quote unquote negative feelings, I guess that's huge. So what then if your pet died or you had a boo-boo or something negative happened to you and you were crying or you were sad and upset or mad, like enter any emotion that is not joy, happiness, or, so how about that? Did they have like tolerance for that? Did they have room for that, space for that?
Well, no, we were all just happy. We were fine. And if we were sad, we needed to very quickly become unsad. So whatever it takes to get unsad, if we need to give you money, if we need to give you food, if we need to buy you clothes, like what do you need?
Fixing the situation.
Fix it, right. Which the intention is well-meaning. I get that. Like if they think my job as a parent is to protect my child from uncomfortable feelings at all costs, and I do that, I get that the intention wasn't to, like you said, no one wakes, well, I'm sure there are very few people wake up and think, how can I mess up my kids for life today? But this whole idea that there are negative emotions, it's like life is complex. It is very complex. And on some days, even quote, good things can feel difficult and difficult things can feel oddly peaceful. And it's very rare that there's a binary of this is good or this is obviously things like assault, war, systemic oppression. Those are inherently bad things. Like there are some absolutes, but to say that I don't even like the idea of negative emotions. It's like there are emotions, period. Some of them are more pleasant than others to experience. But there's no such thing as a bad emotion. And I was not taught that. And it would be wonderful to have a generation of children growing up knowing all feelings are okay. Doesn't mean that what's happening is okay, but all feelings are valid and you're allowed to have a full set, not just the like cherry-picked ones.
I think, when a parent sort of shelters and protects the kid from quote unquote uncomfortable feelings, what they're doing in reality is protecting themselves, right? Because they know they have the discomfort, not the kid. For the kid, adults have accumulated years of experience with life and things and death and grief, unprocessed stuff, unexpressed stuff. Children, more pure. They don't have that life experience baggage with them, right? So when they experience death for the first time or see a funeral or it goes through something, a loss, it's a very innocent, pure first time experience. And so when an adult who comes with that baggage lens of theirs and shelters the kid or does something unhelpful, fixes the situation because of their own discomfort, it immediately puts a distortion, a heavy weight on the kid and just colors the whole experience. Like there's no need for that. Like that's a boundary thing, right? Is this yours or this is your kid's issue? Is this your loss or your kid's loss? How can you create that separation and just open space for their feelings to surface, and can you be present? Can you deal with your own discomfort on the side and not project it onto your kids? One of my listeners recently contacted me, and she said her son is going to take the bus for the first time, not for the first time, in middle school. And she has a hard time with that, for the kid to take the bus to school and home. She says, it's very hard. I don't want to allow him to do that. Right. I said to her, it's very good that you're recognizing that this is your discomfort. Like, your child didn't experience that yet. Okay. Do not bring your experience and color that for your kid. I think it's so important and vital to talk about those things, especially the emotional stuff. Man, it becomes very heavy for kids because of the parental complications most frequently. It's not discomfortable for the kids, it's because the adult does all that stuff. That's what makes it more unbearing.
It's tricky. And projection is a thing that some people don't know about. So if you don't know that emotional boundaries are required so you don't project your stuff onto your children, like, well, what does that even mean? Like, if you asked well-meaning members of my family, did you project on your children? They would be like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, but it's true. It's whose feelings belong to whom and what is actually happening here. And it's hard and it's messy. And there's the shame piece. Parents generally want to do right by their kids. And when they don't, the shame is so intense that often we end up making things worse in our efforts to avoid. Again, I'm not a parent, but I can certainly relate to, in my effort to avoid shame, I created a big old mess, because that's just what happens. True.
What else can you share in terms of helping people become skilled, emotionally skilled, as families, as adults, as parents?
Well, one of my bigger ones, and I am a very loud advocate of body boundaries for children, not making children give hugs, forced touch. It's like, that just makes my skin crawl. Because I grew up in the give grandma a kiss so she's not sad, hug your creepy uncle, sit on so-and-so's lap. And it's like, I have no body autonomy. Of course, as I grow older, I'm going to make really suboptimal relationship choices, because I was never taught my body belongs to me. And this is what good touch feels like. And I don't know who the author is. I wish I could give her credit, but she doesn't, when she's talking about body boundaries with children, it's not like stranger danger. She talks about there are some people that feel tricky. And I love that word, because most of the time, it's not the creepy dude on the playground that's going to create a problem. It's someone very close to home. And a child won't necessarily read that as a, quote, bad person. But most kids intuitively know when people feel tricky. And so teaching children how to know, hey, if someone feels tricky, here are things you can do. And you never have to give so-and-so a hug. But grandma will be sad. Well, guess what? Grandma's an adult, and it's okay for her to be sad. And she can figure out her sad all by herself. So I get very ranty about preserving children's ability to own their bodies.
Yeah, that's a good one, and it's huge. And why do we always, like, adults are interesting? Like in that situation, let's say a parent says, okay, so we have to care about grandma's or some relatives' feelings more than your own. Like, what are we conveying here? Right? It's like, no, this is so wrong. You should always prioritize your child's safety, well-being, their emotions. And it's important to respect elderly and grandma and other people. Right? This is not about disrespect. Right.
And no shame if you've done it. And this goes back to, oops, I was wrong. Like, if you're a parent listening right now and you've forced your children to give hugs, spinning around and, oh my God, what have I done, is not helpful. It's okay. That was a bad call. That was not my best move. Now I know better. I can make a different choice. Like, excellent. The point is not to shame people. It's to give information so that we can protect the children that are coming up. So, if you make a mistake and you didn't intentionally make the mistake because you didn't know, well, now you know. So no forced physical contact with children, even with their own parents. Come give daddy a hug is not a good way to teach a child that they have ownership of their bodies.
Yes. Can you say, can I have a hug? Can I have a kiss? Can you say that?
Yeah. I mean, when I worked with children, I always asked them at the end of session, do you want to hug, a high five, or a wave? And that gave them a menu of options. And this is good with strangers or friends, or when you're bringing children out, that if they want closeness, they have the option of a hug. If they want contact with boundaries, they have the option of a high five. And if they're just like, I'm not about this, then they can wave. And that teaches them how to be respectful while also respecting their own autonomy. So the high five, hug, or wave is a great little hack if you have kids and you don't want to, what do I do if someone's in public?
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Anything else before I open a completely different topic?
For time's sake, we can just move on.
Yes, let's move on for time's sake. The shadow intelligence, the shadow work is fascinating to me. You identify shadow intelligence. There is EQ, there is IQ, and there is shadow intelligence. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah. And Daniel Goleman sort of changed how we talk about feelings with the whole idea of emotional intelligence. Like there's IQ, which is one type of intelligence, but he talked about social and emotional intelligence, which is so, so important. And so when I was playing with all of that research and those ideas, I'm like, well, what about the intelligence that comes with knowing every aspect of your psyche, even the scary stuff, like the stuff that we don't talk about in public, those weird thoughts that I know you think, because I think them too. And understanding which of our parts, when I say parts, like parts of our personality are good and parts have bad thoughts and parts have nice thoughts and parts sometimes have mean thoughts. How close are you with all aspects of your psyche? And so I call that shadow intelligence. And Carl Jung talked about the shadow just being the parts of ourselves that we repress or deny. And it's not always bad stuff. Some people have things like anger and rage in the shadow because they think they should always be good. But some people put their creativity into the shadow because they think they should always be practical. And so the shadow, it's not bad or negative. It's just, what about yourself are you afraid of or ashamed of or think you don't have the right to have? And then once we have a relationship with our shadow parts, then we can make more intelligent decisions about our relationships and our lives and all of the different things in our ecosystem. So I'm like, you need IQ, EQ, and what I call SQ, shadow intelligence.
So how can I discover my SQ if someone is listening? How is there a question, some exercise you would tell us? Something like that.
I love shadow work. I have a bajillion exercises, but the easiest one is go look at your browser history. Just look to where you go when you're mindlessly scrolling on the internet. Like I am more ashamed of, and I don't carry the shame, but I say this tongue in cheek. I will gladly share about my drug addiction, my relationship issues, my family, my cult life, but I'm not going to show someone what I look at on the internet when I'm alone with my thoughts. Just like not bad stuff, just like, wow, that's where I want to go, right? Like that's the rabbit hole I ended up falling down. But your browser history can actually give you a really good insight into look for themes, look for patterns, like where are you finding yourself compelled to go? And there's something to be gained about knowledge about yourself from your browser history, which is a wonderful, again, it's not the be all end all. Someone wrote me and said, I don't like the browser history exercise because I go where I want to go on the internet. I'm like, that's cool. So that exercise is not for you. That's for people like me who will spend hours mindlessly scrolling. And then if you look at your browser history, you can find patterns, but not every exercise is applicable to every person, but that's a good one. Look who triggers you. Who are the people that you, and again, if they're actually like not nice people creating harm, I'm not talking about that. But if you're triggered by certain types of people, notice that, and that'll give you information also.
It could be someone, an influencer or an Instagram person that you're jealous of or something like that. You feel envy towards someone, right?
Yes. And envy is such a misunderstood thing. We just classify envy under the bad column, but envy is a really useful tool for understanding your authentic desire. Envy itself is not good, but if you're looking at influencers in the parenting space and feeling jealous, great. That jealousy is pointing towards an authentic desire, and the jealousy is the shadow. It's, like manifestation of that. But if we know that that's your desire, then we can create a plan to help you move towards what you want. Gossip is not a good thing. It's not a great trait, but gossip shows you that you're wanting to be connected, and we need to find healthier, better ways to make that happen. So all of these traits that we think of as bad have information that will point us towards our wholeness. And when we focus on goodness at the expense of wholeness, things tend to go bad.
True. And lastly, here's what I want to end with. How are you maintaining? What are the things that you engage in, nourishing activities, or I call it radical self-care? What do you do for yourself these days to maintain, to stay on the healing path? I would love to know what are some practices, tools that you use.
My personal practices. So I'm a writer, so I do a lot of writing and lots of journaling. I see a therapist regularly, so I still continue to do my own personal work. I have really, really good friends that I adore and that I don't see very often, because I found for me, constant contact depletes my nervous system. And so I have cultivated relationships where we have permission to go months without seeing each other, and that's fine. We're not taught as adults you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that if that's your thing. So I have wonderful friends that I don't spend a ton of time with. I say no to a lot of things, and I do aerial circus stuff for fun because that's the only place my brain shuts up. So hanging upside down and spinning around on a giant metal bar is really fun for my system.
That's pretty cool. And may I ask, what kind of therapy do you do these days?
I see an internal family systems therapist. So I do parts work. Yeah.
Okay. You still continue with the parts work. It's amazing. I had Dr. Dick Schwartz on the podcast, and he did IFS on me. It was like so incredibly helpful. Honestly,
He's a ninja. I love that model.
It was very, very, it was very helpful. And I was blown away, really. He helped me with my issue. That's pretty cool. So it's not like you have a lot going on. I mean, you say no to people, you still do your therapy, you do something for fun and playfulness. You tackle all the buckets, right? The relationship buckets, the fun bucket, the physical care, your mental health, your physical health. I think that's important. And it sounds like you tried lots of different things, right? You narrowed down to a few main things that preserve you, right? Is that right?
In alignment with who I'm an introvert. Like I love doing things like podcasts and work stuff, but if I'm at a party, I sort of freak out still a little. So I give myself permission to be an introvert. It doesn't mean I don't need people. We all need people, but I could sit there and shame myself for, I should be doing more. I shouldn't be sitting. Like I like to sit in a chair with my coffee in the morning, like just with myself, because I have fun with that. Now I do. It's not hostile in my brain anymore as much as often. But if you don't give yourself permission to be uniquely wired, then you're not going to know which self-care for you might be self-harm for me, And so it's so important to know, is this thing that we all say is quote good, is it good for you? Does it work for you? And you have permission to modify almost any practice to make it work for how you're uniquely wired and how you walk in the world. And that's really, really good news. So I've tweaked the things so they work for me, but they don't work for everyone.
Yeah. Yes, that's great. And parting words, Britt, what do you have any questions you can leave us with that the listener can ponder on, or an exercise that they can do, or just maybe wishes? Or if you don't have anything, that's okay too.
I'll leave you with an exercise because I really like actionable takeaways. That's my New York Jew part. So instead of starting with the why, most people start with when they're struggling. Why do I feel this way? And why am I doing this? And why is a useful question, but it's not a great starting place. In fact, it's a terrible starting place. So toss the why into the to-do later pile. Instead of a why question, ask a what question. What are my people, places, things, thoughts? What are my options to help myself right now, not later, not next week, not yet next year, right now? What are 10 people, places, thoughts, or things that can help me feel a little bit less bad? Of that, pick one and do it. So step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 1, turn your why into a what. Step 2, make a list of choices, even if it's small and even if they seem silly. Step 3, pick one, do it, repeat.
Great. Well, this was fun. The time went by very quickly, just the way the book reading went very quickly. I read it like in one breath, and you tackled so many, lots of, it's like an encyclopedia. You get bits of things about everything. It's like my podcast squeezed into a little book because we talk to all the authors and all the science, all the topics that you cover in the book. For 7 years, we covered on the podcast. Well, now there's a little book called The Science of Stuck. Everything is squeezed in there. I love that you made it very accessible, and you have lots of exercises in the book, which is great because always people want some actionable stuff, right? Even if it's a tiny bit of thing. And I did something which I read in the book too, but I knew it from a different source. I was walking yesterday, not feeling so great, like I was in my dorsal shutdown mode, I guess. And I grabbed a bag of ice cubes and, I was just walking around, slowly and putting the ice all over my body. And, little do you know, like 15 minutes later, wow, I'm more invigorated. I feel different. So, holding a little bag of ice cubes and touching ice or chewing ice, those little things matter. They make a big difference. They do help.
Yeah. They don't fix everything, but they can make the difference between a reactivity kind of thing and a decision kind of thing. So I love using ice. That is one of my favorite little, how do I slow myself down just a little bit right now? Like grab some ice.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much. I wish you lots of success in the world and in your work. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. What's your biggest takeaway? Did you find it useful? How can you apply what you gleaned from this episode into your own life? I would love to hear from you. How are you enjoying the podcast? What are some of your favorite episodes? I welcome your feedback, comments, and questions. Get in touch. Send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. Call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. And for you international listeners, there is a free tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and send me a message. If you enjoy the podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, consider becoming a patron on patreon.com. With a small monthly contribution, you can support your favorite show. Join other big-hearted individuals, 21 to be exact, who together contribute $121 towards our monthly goal of $500. To learn more and choose a level of support, go to patreon.com/authentic parenting or click the link in your show notes. You can find the show and follow it because I know you don't want to miss new episodes wherever podcasts are played. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and elsewhere. And if you want to know what I'm up to in my private life, connect with me on Instagram, the only social media platform that I use. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself, and your children. I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening.